Thanks very much for this opportunity. Thanks, Marcy, for the introduction. All right, so just before I jump into the talk, I'll give you a bit background on the current status of CSIRO's data Sichuan. So CSIRO's data Sichuan, we have around 1,000 people, that's including all the students and affiliates we have across Australian universities. Obviously, we collaborate a lot. We have a lot of government and industry partners, and we spin out companies. At this moment of time, we are very much focusing on responsible AI, which includes cybersecurity, privacy challenges, resilience and recovery technology, which when we say resilience and recovery, obviously there's the COVID natural disaster Australians facing, some of the resilience and recovery in there, but also includes cyber resilience and recovery from cyber attacks. We have a lot of facilities, actually, many of the SMEs and our industry partners has been using over the years, including things like mixed reality lab for Industry 4.0 and some of the AI for cyber secure enclave. If you're dealing with very sensitive data or dealing with sensitive IP, but you want to collaborate in a secure environment, we provide a lot of these facilities for our partners and industry partners. And finally, if you haven't read on the news, the National AI Center has been launched in Australia, I think last year, December, quietly. And now we have a new director, Stella Sola, have joined Data Sichuan to lead the National AI Center. If you search around, the National AI Center is doing a lot of engagement with industry at the moment. The National AI Center, actually, the reason, although this is a cyber talk, I just want to mention there's a lot of cyber angles in it. You may have other speakers already talked about this, so I'm not going into the details, but the emphasis I want to put here is first, the National AI Center is for AI adoption, especially for SME. It's not a research center, it's for AI adoption. So the government funding is to help SMEs to adopt any emerging technologies, including AI and cybersecurity. The National AI Center have 4 overarching themes. There are more capability centers to come, but at this stage, there's an overarching theme in responsible AI, AI diversity and inclusion, and AI at scale. In responsible AI, obviously, as I mentioned already, security of AI systems, privacy of AI systems are a key focus of responsible AI at the moment. That's one of the very mature technology, as many of the industry partners will know. AI at scale is, again, if you're really deploying an AI system in the real world, there's a lot of new security challenges. Whether you're exposing your AI as a service, maybe you're a bit worried about your machine learning model being stolen. If people query your model in a very selective way, you might be worried about the counterexamples, you might be worried about data poisoning in your training. So many issues in real world dealing with messy data and then potentially adversaries of your AI system definitely requires a lot of more security thinking in the real world environment. We're also offering actually 500 scholarships, and there's 250 for each of the substreams in terms of next generation AI and cybersecurity graduates. That's including students for undergraduates, master students, and PhD students. And the emerging technology specifically focusing on cybersecurity and a few other things. So if you're interested, have a look at the link I provide, CSIRO.au/nextgen. Because there are these 500 students waiting to be placed in any of the companies, and we prioritize many of the SME companies if you need a student to be placed in your environment to learn and also to help you. Okay, so why SME really care about cybersecurity? One thing is, the government is encouraging many of the companies to do digital transformation, to export significantly, because Australia, after all, is has a limited market size. So a lot of the, I think, yeah, we're on the right slides. Apologies. So we have a lot of companies need to be integrated into global supply chain, global environment, and cybersecurity and AI is quite important to achieve many of these. And also you are under pressure to do more in cybersecurity and sustainability practice, and that has a lot of cost. So SMEs are probably hesitating in doing some of this. However, if you look at the research have done internationally on SME adoption of cyber and AI and digital, you will find actually, if you adopt AI and cybersecurity technologies, your export intensity will increase. I mean, obviously, this is a survey of across the industry, but you will only achieve that kind of additional innovation and export opportunities if your adoption of AI and cybersecurity to a certain level. So there's this magic point. If you're interested, you can read the paper itself. Basically, you need to have a base point. It's not, if your AI and cybersecurity maturity is fairly low, a lot of things seem to be still very costly to do in innovation in other things. But if you break this point, it's much easier for you later to adopt other type of technologies and develop new products. So I think you need a little bit early investment to achieve this. However, why it's so difficult to achieve this? I think there are two primary challenges. One is obviously in the industry, SMEs are always constrained by capacity, and even you have amazing skills, some of your employees, there's a limited capacity for them to engage in cybersecurity, AI, and additional innovation, especially if there's additional research and development to be done. The second one is if you engage with university or CSIRO today, most of the models require a one-to-one engagement. And there is a SME Connect in CSIRO, there is a government voucher, but as an SME, you have to go to CSIRO to say, I want to talk to some researchers. And it's a lengthy process, because the right researchers might be busy on other projects, although they have some conversation, they will say, sorry, I can only engage in 6 months later, or maybe even the conversation takes time. And for SMEs and especially startups, you need very quick way moving forward. You can't just have one-on-one meetings with university academics and CSIRO researchers to engage with you, and they are also capacity limited. So how do you turn this one-to-one model into a one-to-many model? So some of the experiments we have done within DataSH1, I'm going to give a few example solutions that we have achieved at the moment. So the first one is easy. It's an open source system. Although DataSH1 is a government agency and funded by taxpayer money, but we believe in for certain technologies, especially for some, very beneficial technology for Australian company, the best way to engage is to open source it. So I'm giving one example here is, for example, DataSH1 has been a partner with Boeing in US for many years. And we developed many technologies for Boeing companies in terms of their in-flight, IoT system, some of their factory safety systems. And for some of their technology, they engage with a lot of suppliers. So one reason they engage with DataSH1 to develop a piece of technology in this particular example, it's a IoT modular system, secure IoT system, is they want to encourage their suppliers. By the way, their suppliers are in the hundreds, and many SMEs are in there, including Australian companies, to supply. Major international companies, their supply chain is extremely complex, 3,000 companies in their supply chain across different tiers. They can't easily engage with all of them, but they can point to a particular open source software to say, if you use that open source library for your IoT products, if we want to sell to Boeing, that's a very good starting point. That library, secure IoT and modular library, has been co-developed with DataSH1, and it has examples in it. It has a lot of case studies of it. If you use that, you are in a much better position to be integrated into the Boeing's global supply chain. So we have success stories in there which Australian companies have used that. Although it's open source, everybody can use across the world. Importantly, we will prioritize Australian companies if you need some additional support of open source system. So that's one way we engage with many companies, and many of them don't need additional support. They just can pick up the open source and they can run with it. Second one is SMEs has been, in the AI and the cyberspace, SMEs have been struggling to collect data. How do we get a lot of companies, SMEs, coming together to share some data? It's not just the large companies can collect a lot of data. Smaller companies can collect data as well, but they don't have a lot of potentially big data. They need some sharing. So in that regard, we are helping them to set up data commons for SME. But some of the SME are very worried about the commercial sensitivity of data. So how do we provide a very secure environment so a few trusted partners to put data together to do some machine learning over it? So we have done some technologies to support that. And also we are bringing in Australian company with international supply chain again. For example, this the US Department of Homeland Security, they have an impact program sharing cybersecurity data between countries, US, Australian, and a dozen countries around the world. Data Sichuan is the Australian coordinator of sharing data from US cybersecurity companies and also sharing it back. So, and it's a curated process. If you are a company, if you are a research organization, you can apply, and the Data Sichuan will be able to have a look at the suitability of this data to be shared or maybe received, and we can facilitate that connection. So this is a way to help the data challenge of SME. The next one is really, people can engage in a living lab or open lab. It's like MIT Media Lab. As big or smaller companies, if you want to do some research, rather than doing a one-on-one research collaboration, you can join your fellow companies to join a living lab, and in that we can do some innovation for the entire ecosystem or sector on a particular topic. So one of the living labs we are thinking about is around the digital trust. We know trust is now the new currency in many of your products, especially you have cybersecurity, AI, data in your product. It's an AI-driven or cyber data-driven product. How can people trust your product? If your product is gathering data, your product got sensors, cameras, microphones, how can people trust your product is responsible? So some of the challenges here is to get solutions together to get your product more trusted. The next one is really around technology platforms or early access. So Data Sichuan is not, obviously, as a government agency, research agency, we are not competing with Australian companies in any way. So, but when we develop a piece of technology, how do we get to the market? Is we give this technology to Australian SMEs and startups. And for them to have early access of these technologies, we have various programs. If you're going to go to the Data Sichuan website, we'll find early access programs for various technologies. The technology we're building largely is platform technology, meaning by itself, the platform itself is not that useful. It's not a product. But with your entrepreneurship, business ideas, you can build a solution on top of the platform. And this early access to this kind of platform also helping us to prioritize what features in the platform is needed by the market. It's a wonderful way for us to learn from SMEs, but also for SMEs to take advantage of our technology platforms that you can build your solution on it. So here is just a few examples. The other one is really shared infrastructure. I know for some digital companies, maybe there's not too much of a problem with facilities and infrastructures. But for some other companies, especially dealing with physical equipment, a lot of very expensive equipment, or you're dealing with a highly, highly sensitive environment, which you need to use to interact with defense companies, with the Australian government. How can you build up that very highly, highly secure environment to conduct your research and develop your products with a certain level of trust for your clients? Your client is defense. Your client is a defense prime. Your client is a government agency. They may be very worried about your security posture. So we provide a lot of infrastructure for SMEs if you're interested to use to conduct your additional innovation together with Data Sichuan. And on top of that, we can make sure the government trusts your solution, the solution you have been developing. So in here, we have high performance computing for cyber and AI, some virtual labs for AI and cyber, and also some blockchain-based trust infrastructure as well. Finally, the final example I'm going to give is reference implementations for standards and other things. Internationally, no matter where you look, cybersecurity, AI, trustworthy AI, everything, there will be standards. It's easier for large companies to say, I got a lot of lawyers, I got a lot of 1,000 developers. If we want to make our products into a standards compliant form, we can just throw these resources to it. But for SMEs, that's extremely difficult. By reading the hundreds of standards, it itself takes a lot of time. How can you be competing with your large companies, competitors who can do a lot of standard compliance stuff? So in US, they have a model. So NIST is US's standards body. There is a T in the NIST in US standards body is technology, meaning in addition to developing standards, they constantly releasing guidelines, reference implementations, exemplars. How do you implement these standards in a typical scenario? So all this information are available for a lot of the Australian, US companies and in a selected way. But Australian, we only develop standards. We don't have a lot of guidelines on how to implement standards. We don't have reference implementations that you can pick up and to try to integrate that, to learn from it into your products. So DataSichuan is focusing a lot of this reference implementation of standards so that people can easily adopt standards, especially for SME. And there are also standards we developed just for Australian industry. Remember, DataSichuan was the initial data standard body for many years for the consumer data right. So we released API standards for sharing your banking data. We released the security profiles. We released a lot of other consent management standards in Australia, and through a very consultative way. So many SMEs, especially in fintech space, have participated in creating standards for Australian open banking. And we can create similar structures for other things within Australia to unlock the potential of data. Okay, so I'm going to just stop there. And if you want to engage with DataSichuan and do better in, allow us to help you on cyber adoption, there were many of ways that I have introduced today in one-to-many or one-to-one case. And I'll stop here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Liming. Can we give him a quick round of applause? Thank you. Do we have any questions for Liming?
Yeah.
Thanks for the nice talk. Can you please go to the benefits of cyber slide?
At the very beginning, you mean this one? Yeah.
No, the next one.
On the next one.
No, this one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so this diagram, the paper has a lot of information, but it's largely to say people want to do two things. One is around AI and the digital. The other thing is on here, the interaction of the AI readiness with sustainability readiness, meaning you have to do a lot of ESG stuff. And how can you achieve that faster for the sustainability one? So if you, you don't have a lot of AI and cyber readiness, actually, it will hinder your adoption of additional sustainability and ESG type of thing. But if you are higher AI and cyber investment early on, you will achieve your other strategic goals easier. So it's like a sequential thing. People say, should I do cyber and AI first, or should I do sustainability first? They cost a lot. But the study just says, do your AI and cyber first. Once you are at a certain maturity level, the rest of the opportunities you can much easier for you to capture.
Thank you. We've got a question in the back.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the NIST framework solutions you mentioned there.
Yeah.
In terms of what Australia could do, in terms of guidance or exemplars, as you mentioned, how do you anticipate that could work, particularly around things like AI trustworthiness, which, as you know, is only just being developed a lot? So how could that be executed in real terms, particularly noting the previous question in terms of if you were to do it, are we going to be doing it ahead of what these actual standards are being set?
Yeah, that's a very timely question. I was just discussing that this morning. And actually, there is an internal debate. We run learning debate within DataSichuan on AI trust mark, which is, you may remember the concept proposed by Alan Finkel, the then chief scientist. So how do we get this? I think there are a few players here. So first, you have international standards. Standards are already setting what is trustworthy, these standards in there. But as a certification body, someone has to play a certification organization's role to say, here's the international standard, there are 30 of them, so many of them, IEEE, ISO. For Australian or more for international audience, here is the subset of the standards or the subsection of the standards we are endorsing for something like a trust mark or trustworthy AI. And this organization, once they do that, other organizations can start into accreditation organization to start accrediting practitioners and other organizations. Then they can go into a company to inspect and certify them. So there are multiple players. There is a sequence of who should exist first and who is going to take on the certification organization within Australian. Obviously, I'm sort of discussing with the Stella National AI Center director to say, National AI Center is about AI adoption, but isn't it very important to have a trust mark support in National AI Center? So when people adopt AI, people know the AI solution they develop is trusted through some kind of Australian system. But on the other hand, I know there's a lot of feedback coming from industry to say, we can't do a country-wide thing, because if I'm going to do additional things for Australian trust mark, what about Europe? What about? But we can learn from them. European, the AI regulation, they're already doing CE marking for all the international standards. So we could adopt this kind of approach, a CE marking to the international ISO standards, which Australia is participating very actively in there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on to our next speaker now. Liming, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Happy to be contacted. Yeah.